and also. And one day in the Danish West Indies, a young man boarded their ship. And that man was Ward-Heitmann. And he came to West Haven and was introduced to the Ward family. And of course, he was introduced into the only girl in the family, which was at the time Louisa Ward. And he in turn married Louisa Ward. And that's how we get into the Ward-Heitmann family. We have here, and we're going to be learning a lot about the Ward family and their descendants. This is the Captain Frederick Stevens Ward right here. And we're very fortunate to have his actual log. The captains used to write logs. There was a captain log, and this is his log, his actual log written in his handwriting aboard his ship, the Howard. And this is his travels from 1849 to 1850. Again, most of the time he was traveling to the Puerto Rico and Caribbean area. Not only do we have his logbook, but this was actually the captain's sea chest. This was his chest that he had aboard every time he went on his voyages. And this too was given to us by descendants of Frederick Stevens Ward. Captain Frederick Stevens Ward, although his middle name is Stevens, he also married Mary Stevens. And it's through the Mary Stevens that we have received most of the material pertaining to the Stevens family and the Stevens house. We do have melodeum, and this was based on the organ family, and we tried to get it to work, but we never did really get it to operate. And this was actually built here in New Haven, Connecticut, and it was about just about pre-Civil War days. 1856 to 1863, and this is Trent and Lindsay of New Haven, Connecticut. Remember, Frederick Stevens Ward had a daughter. The daughter was Josephine. Now, Josephine was mute. She couldn't speak. She later went to Northampton, Massachusetts, to the Clark Institute that she was taught, and she learned how to speak. She later on, remember, this is the daughter of the captain. She married this man from New York. He was much older than her, and he was a Whitney. We don't know he was in any way related to the Whitneys of New Haven, but she married, and she had a child called Reginald. And we have a picture of Reginald as a child, and Reginald then in turn married. Now the thing about this is that after she married Whitney, she came back to Connecticut and actually lived in the Stevens house, the Stevens historical house. In the Stevens historical house that she gave birth to Reginald. And Reginald turned out to be, later on in life, he was a captain in the United States Air Force. That was his daughter, Josephine, but this was his son, Frederick Sherman Ward. Now, Frederick Sherman Ward married into the Smith family. And this is Jenny Lynn Smith. And the Smith family in the past were also related to the Painter family. So this is Jenny Smith. Now we come into this beautiful painting, who this person was. This person was a Smith girl. She was the sister of Jenny Lind. Now, just like the captain had his log, Jenny, Hattie, her name was Hattie. They called her Hattie, actually Harriet. It was at Christmas time. And she received a gift, and she received a blank book, and from that blank book she wrote her diary, and we have her diary here, and it happened to be her 16th birthday. So she wrote that whole diary for the whole year when she was 16 years old. So we have life of a young girl living in West Haven, Connecticut, and her life as a 16-year-old child. And in the diary, she liked to be a writer. She loved poetry, and we wrote a little bit of poetry. She always went to church, and she had a remarkable memory because she would come home and she'd practically write word for word whatever the minister had to say. She had one complaint though about the ministers. She did not like when the minister used any notes. She also said that there were not any eligible, nice young men in West Haven. Well, she never did marry. She died in 1880 when she was only 26 years old. And this portrait is dated 1881, which was the year after she died. So we could just assume that the family must have had a picture of her. And they commissioned an artist, a West Haven famous artist, Harry Ives Thompson, to paint her portrait. And Henry Ives Thompson is a well-known artist because he's listed in a book of early American artists. And he lived in West Haven and died in West Haven, the artist. And that's how we have this portrait, primarily because she turns out to be the sister of the wife of the son of the captain. Frederick Sherman Ward was in everything. He was also in shipping, but he was also in real estate, banking, insurance, and in fact, he was also a person way ahead of his time in marketing because he had an ad placed about his fire insurance. But the ad was written in Italian. So here he was appealing to the Italian immigrants in the area to come and purchase fire insurance to help them protect their own furniture. He also was an inventor. He invented bifocals. And we actually have, through his descendants, a pair of his eyeglasses here. He was also a photographer. And a lot of the pictures we have are photoed by this particular man. Frederick Sherman Ward had a diary for every single year. And we have all his diaries here in the museum. Most of the information in his diary is about the weather and how he gained some weight and so forth. But in it, he was also very much interested in music. And he was involved with the Gnold Singing Society and the Oratorio Society. And in his diary, he would always mention that he had rehearsals for these societies that he was involved in. But in this diary, he mentions his daughter, and you can see that his daughter meant a great deal to him. His daughter was Harriet. She too loved music, and she played the organ and in churches, and also accompanied sometimes in some of the singing activities that he was involved in. But in the diary, all of a sudden you get the impression that he was a little bit upset about the fact that she was going to marry this New Yorker who was Claude Walker. And actually, they did get married, and they were married in New York. The daughter and the husband lived in Darien, Connecticut, and they carried on the tradition of their great uncle Samuel Stevens, whom we met in the other room. Samuel Stevens, when he was a young boy in school, his teacher gave them a medal that they were to wear at the 200th anniversary celebration of New Haven, which was 1838. With the understanding that the teacher told them that he had hoped that these students would continue to wear these medals in various other celebrations that were going on in New Haven. And Samuel Stevens did. He wore it into a celebration in 1888, and he was so popular there that he even got another medal. But he also said that he wished that these medals would be carried on. Well, the Walker's family actually fulfilled his wish, because when it was the tercentennial celebration in 1938 in New Haven, they drove an automobile and proudly showed the medals that he owned, and they received a great deal of publicity on it. And it is through the Walker family that we still have a great deal of material that have come to this house. Actually, we have a collection that is actually called the Emmeline Smith Walker Fatherly and Alice Walker collection, in which we are continually receiving material from their descendants. Claude Walker. We don't know too much about him, and in some articles he's listed as a doctor, and we do know that he gave lectures, so we think maybe he was in the academic field. But later on, the family, the daughter and the husband moved to Brooklyn, New York, and it was holiday time, and Frederick Sherman Ward, the father, decided to visit them and spend the holiday with them in Brooklyn, New York. And it was there in Brooklyn, New York, while visiting his favorite daughter, that he passed away. Harriet and Claude Walker had two daughters. One was Emmeline, and the other one was Alice. And the Emmelines married into the Fatherlys. And that's how the Fatherlys live in Danvers in Fairfield County, and comes and visits us many times and is instrumental in giving us a lot of the material that they have kept through the years. This particular piece of furniture, and we'll get back to the dress later, this particular piece of furniture too was of the Stevens house. We had the desk in the other room. Here we have the bureau, which is again an early 1800 a piece of furniture that again was given to us, even though it was in the Stevens house, but since it was not an historical house anymore, it came to be in our possession. Here we have a dress. This was Farnsworth. They were a family of New Haven, and who gave us the dress and information about Horace Farnsworth, who served in the Civil War, who was very active in the Grand Army of the Republic. This dress was actually a wedding dress, even though it's black and it's lace. It was 1861 when she married. The Union soldiers who survived formed an organization called the Grand Army of the Republic, and he was very active in that. And we do have his commemorative sword, and we have a Bible that the auxiliary of the organization gave to us. Now we're going to go visit another of the Ward boys or Ward men. This happens to be Minot. Minot was one of the ones we met when we originally saw the picture of all the Ward boys. Minot never married. He too was a sea captain. That's the picture of the Battle of Fort Fisher. Now, in U.S. history, it's not one of the most important battles that are usually mentioned as far as the others like Gettysburg and so forth. But it was a very strategic battle, predominantly because the fort guarded the base of the Fore River in North Carolina. It protected Wilmington, North Carolina, which was the last stronghold of the Confederacy. Once Wilmington, North Carolina was destroyed, the Confederacy, according to history, was gone. It was over. But Fort Fisher had to be destroyed. General Grant knew of the strategic importance of Fort Fisher. He tried once to destroy it, and it failed. The second time, he got the Navy, the Marines, and the Army to fight. And of course, we won this time. And at that time, Minot, who was a sea captain, was commissioned. And in the picture, you'll see a picture of a ship in the distance, but we don't know whether that was Minot's ship. But he was commissioned to take off of Fort Fisher the Confederate prisoners that survived. We know all this because we have from the Fatherlys Minot's last letter. And in the letter, he talks about he was at off of the Fort Fisher, and also he was invited to go on to the fort after the battle was fought, because in this battle we do know that General Terry, who was from New Haven, was part of this battle. But anyway, Minot saw the big gun. There was a very huge gun that was very vital for the defense of the fort. That was a British gun. And also, it just so happened while he was there, a big explosion occurred. And it was an accidental explosion that somehow or other caused an accident to happen that killed a lot of the Union people that were on board on there. According to the letter, his last letter, he says, well, he did what he had to do to get the prisoners on board ship, and he took them to where he was supposed to take them to. And he said, and now I've got to see what I'm going to do next. Well, from here on, we do learn what happened to Minot. After he left Fort Fisher, he went to Wilmington, North Carolina. And as I said, Wilmington, North Carolina was the last stronghold of the Confederacy. It was also at a time when there were other battles going on in North Carolina, and a lot of soldiers from the Illinois Volunteer Infantry Division were sent to Wilmington, North Carolina after they fought their battles, and they were waiting to be shipped home. And Minot, too, was at Wilmington, North Carolina, and he put on board his ship these soldiers that had just completed a battle and had survived and were ready to go home on his ships. Because the Confederates had an overflow of Union prisoners in their prisons, and they started to ship these prisoners to Wilmington, North Carolina. And so on board Minot's ship, he also started to put on the Union soldiers that were prisoners of the Confederacy on board his ship. So now he had the Illinois troop people that just fought a battle. He had the Union soldiers that had been prisoners of the Confederacy on his ship. And not only that, because it was still getting to the end of the war, there were a lot of refugees. There were women and children that were fleeing. And so they too, the women and children, boarded his ship. How did we know all this? Well, we know it because tragedy struck. And when tragedy strikes, what happens? The media takes over, right? In the London Times,